I hope everyone can hear me and see me well. And welcome to Smart Cities Week, another online session. This one's around Brisbane 2032. And I would just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. And I also would like to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So our host today is Barton Green, who's the CEO of Community for Brisbane. And the Community for Brisbane is an independent apolitical organisation that's been advocating for South East Queensland to become Australia's first data community. And Barton's just going to go over some of the community's work to pursue this agenda. So over to you, Barton. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I'll just get my screen up. Good afternoon or morning, everybody, depending on where you're dialing in from. And thanks for the introduction, Matt. The Australian New Zealand Smart Cities Council is an affiliate member of the Committee for Brisbane, and through the work of the previous Executive Director, Adam Beck, who was based in Brisbane, we developed some interesting ideas together. And I just thought I'd take you through some of that today. From the outset, I'm not a subject matter expert. I work primarily in the political field. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is policy development, I guess relationships with government, and particularly engagement between the private sector and the public sector. As Iman said, I'm going to talk to you about a project, an ambitious project that we launched a couple of years ago with the title Australia's First Data Community. It was work that was done to try to progress some conversations between government and the private sector about a smart future for South East Queensland. Just some context for South East Queensland, it's the fastest growing region in Australia. Over the next 20 odd years, the population in South East Queensland is expected to double, another couple of million people living here, 800,000 new homes. And I'll talk later in this presentation about some of the challenges and opportunities that come with that, but it certainly provides scope for a really robust and informative smart city or smart region approach. So, with the support of about 20 to 25 members of the Committee for Brisbane, and we're an apolitical and independent voice that advocates to governments for the city and the region, we pulled together 30 odd members of ours in late 2020 who wanted to volunteer their time and their experience to talk about opportunities for a smart city or smart region in South East Queensland. Over many months of work, that resulted in the publication of this paper, South East Queensland, Australia's First Data Community. And we struggled for a while over what's the title that we'd like to use to try to describe the ambitions that we had for the region. And we settled on data community as an expansive way of talking about the relationship between information and data and the technology and the policies best to exploit that. And in June 2021, the then CEO of Infrastructure Australia, Romilly Mathew, launched this document for us in Brisbane, which was very well received, and it set out a number of reasonably ambitious objectives for our region. We stated at the outset what our vision was for South East Queensland, and I know there's a lot of words there, but I'll read through that because we were pretty careful about selecting the themes and the tone of what we wanted to do. We said that being Australia's first data community would be a digitally integrated region built on strong ethical foundations, and you'll see ethics really permeate a lot of what we talk about in the policy, to harness technology and data for social good. And that was a really strong particular set of words that we wanted to include here. As a smart region that embraces continual improvement, South East Queensland's achievements will be measured by an empowered community that enjoys improved quality of life, they're the outcomes, and well-being, frictionless public access to information and services, and unlocking the data economy to drive a thriving regional economy. There's a lot of pretty active words in that vision, but we worked pretty hard to select those because we wanted it to be aspirational, we wanted it to be outcomes focused, and we wanted to try to encourage private sector and governments to look for a future that really moves the dial for South East Queensland in the smart city and smart region space. The Committee for Brisbane has four key pillars that it operates under: connected, creative, enterprising and equitable. And we use those themes to look at what the outcomes might be if we achieved our vision under those themes. So some of these are pretty simple, but they're very ambitious at the same time. Under our connected theme, our objective was that any citizen or business can access the data and information that is important to them anywhere and anytime. Pretty simple set of words, but a lot of ambition in that. Under our creative theme, we talked about business and community entrepreneurship being nurtured and facilitated through world's best standard digital and data literacy. And entrepreneurship is a key plank that the committee seeks to foster as it operates generally in Southeast Queensland. And the opportunity to use digital and data literacy and technology to support that was critical. Under our other two themes, under enterprising, we said that the objective should be that economic opportunities are identified and realised through governments, business and local communities participating in the data economy, including data transparency, access and sharing. And under equitable, we said that Southeast Queensland, if we achieve these objectives, should be more livable, sustainable and equitable, driven by a social licence to operate as a smart region. And that's a big ask. There's a lot to do to have the social licence to operate, that is underpinned by good data practices and the data literacy competency of businesses and citizens. And you'll see that theme through a lot of what we talk about as well, is that I'm not wanting to preach the converter, but it's all well and good to have access to data, but if you don't know how best to use it, to have it inform your business practices, it's just simply information. So the data literacy competency is a really critical element of what we wanted to achieve through the data community vision. To define a data community, we came up with 5 projects or ideas that we thought might allow us to collect our thoughts and have a discussion with governments and others about what does it actually mean to be a data community. And I'll pick these apart one by one in a moment. And they were these: a data hub, data and digital literacy programs I've just talked about, a smart infrastructure policy for our state and our region, the Data Leadership Accelerator Fund and the Data Leadership Commissioner. And those of you who are in other jurisdictions will be familiar with some of these. There are jurisdictions in Australia that are reasonably well advanced in these areas and others not so much, but we felt that these 5 would allow us to move the dial fairly significantly for business and community in Southeast Queensland. The Data Hub was a pretty simple concept. A dedicated facility to champion data leadership and empower citizens, communities and businesses to participate in city analytics. And these exist in various forms right across the country in private and public sectors. This particular project, for this particular policy, we were looking to partner with QUT, the Queensland University of Technology, that had an application in for ARC funding to set up a data hub at QUT. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in their first bid for that. We're hoping to continue to work with them, but we were looking to have a spot where people could literally come along and kick it and smell it and feel it and play with it and get to understand how data could be used for good, particularly for businesses. And I'm hopeful that we can pursue that further. But unfortunately, we had an issue at stage 1 where the funding wasn't available, but we're still working with QUT to try to move that forward. The second point, which I've already talked about, was the literacy and capability of businesses. So this doesn't really exist that we've been able to see. It may in other jurisdictions, but we wanted to try to establish a data literacy and engagement program, as I've said here, to provide a tiered approach to prepare the region and its citizens for maintaining data and technological sovereignty. That's really important, those issues of security and risk management. By raising awareness of data-related concerns and improving levels of data literacy before engaging in data actions and data futures. So getting people aware of the risk and the opportunity, training them with the capability to manage data, access data, share data, and apply it to their businesses, but do that before we moved into a broader access to data and all it can offer to our region. To date, we don't have that set up, and it's something that we've started a discussion with the governments about, and I'm hoping that over time, as interest and pressure comes from the private sector about the need to risk our data and digital capability as businesses, particularly small businesses, we can move to something that's a bit more structured in that space. The third project was a smart infrastructure policy, and this exists in some states. And it was to bring Queensland particularly into line at this stage, when we wrote this in 2021, with national best practice to help shape better outcomes from the significant pipeline of investment in the region. Most people on this call will be aware that Brisbane is going to be hosting the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2032. That's about 9 and a bit years away. You might also be aware that our population is expected to double over the next 20 odd years, as I said earlier. As a result of just those two things, and also the South East Queensland City deal that was signed by all three levels of government in April last year, there are billions of dollars of investment pending in infrastructure and other things in South East Queensland. Our belief is that if we have a smart infrastructure policy to map that growth, that the state and the community and governments will get the best out of their spend for their buck. Our view is that the policy would articulate a minimum level of technology and data enablers that would be embedded into any state-funded infrastructure projects. We nominated the value at $10 million simply to set a level, and I'll talk to you about what we've done with this particular project and idea in a few minutes. So that was a pretty critical one. Policy for me, I've been in and around government for a long time, is critical. And, business tends to be more aggressive in a positive way, more aggressive and more nimble than governments that necessarily need to be cautious about changes to policy or introduction of new policy. And part of this is to try to set up a set of frameworks that will allow decision making to be based on agreed formulas to ensure that we can get a smart infrastructure approach to any new infrastructure or retrofitted infrastructure that the state manages. A pretty important piece of work if we can get it up. The fourth project was the Data Leadership Accelerator Fund, and I'm aware that something like this exists in other states of Australia, but simply it's a co-investment fund where funds that the state provide, and potentially the federal government, but where the state provide in partnership with local governments, can help any local government. We've got 12 here in South East Queensland, 13 I think in South East Queensland, invest in data enabling actions and other activities to service their community. And we would all know that there's a big difference between some local governments, big and small. There's a lot of ambition in the local governments in South East Queensland to move to a smart infrastructure, smart data and smart region future. And this was simply a way of trying to encourage that and support that with a co-investment fund from the state government. And the final project was the concept of a data leadership commissioner. There are various commissioners and ombudsmen in jurisdictions that look after particular sectors of the economy or the community. What we found, I'm sure this exists in other jurisdictions, is that particularly in government, there can be a siloed approach to how budgets are managed and projects are managed, particularly in the very large government agencies. I'm not picking on these particularly, but for example, health and main roads, really huge budgets, very big organisations. And what we see, and I think they'd be the first to admit, there's not a lot of sharing, I guess, of ideas across those big departments, some of which operating as businesses with their own strategic plans. The suggestion of the Data Leadership Commissioner was essentially an omnipresent person, individual or office that can really help coordinate across government so that we are helping them to share with business and the community opportunities that the work that governments are doing to make a stronger, more digital economy a reality, particularly in those key areas listed at the bottom of this on privacy, security, ethics and governance. These things are critical to get right before we move fully down that pathway. So that was our fifth idea. At about the same time we were doing that, the Smart Cities Council was publishing its 2032 objectives, and together we had about 7 or 8 ideas that we were looking to pursue in conversations with government. So we got together and said, why don't we meet and try to come up with a priority set of projects that both organisations and their members can work towards. So we held a workshop, about 40 people involved, and we literally took a vote on, I think, 7 or 8 different projects that were either in the Smart Cities Council 2032 legacy objectives, or in our paper, and we landed on these three as projects that were worth pursuing first. The concept of the digital twin, a data exchange, and the development of a smart infrastructure policy. Collectively, the two organisations pulled together a working group with about 20 people on it and a small management committee that did some of the heavy lifting. And we picked the smart infrastructure policy as the first of the three projects that we wish to pursue. Over many months of work, at the end of last year, in October last year, we published privately, this is not in the public domain, we published privately a framework for a South East Queensland smart infrastructure policy. It specifies South East Queensland because my organisation is a geographically based one, and I don't have a remit to be advocating for other parts of Queensland. But we were very clear in the paper that what we are proposing in the framework is completely repeatable, transferable, or scalable to cover all of Queensland. We presented this to the state government towards the end of last year, the Department of State Development, Infrastructure and Planning, and had a really good chat with them about how the concepts in the framework might support some of the projects that the state government is undertaking in the digital area. And the lines of communication remain open, and we're hopeful that we can keep working as a group of businesses and organisations with the state to try to develop something that sets up, as I said earlier, a set of rules for which all state government projects over a certain capital investment apply to themselves, so that we ensure we get the best access to a data and digital future, at least led by the state, and with business to provide its support and input to that process as well. So that's live and active now and fairly new, that framework document. And our thanks go particularly to Adam Beck, the former Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council, who did an enormous amount of work in drafting the original version of the document and allowed us then to present something to the government which is, we think, well structured and well thought out, not overly ambitious, it's realistic, and we hope something that we might see developing in the months and years ahead here. The purpose of that document, as I said, was this: to support the Queensland Government in the development of a policy that builds on its Smarter Infrastructure for Queensland directions paper. The state has taken a lead in this space and has set out some objectives. We wanted to set minimum requirements for technology to be embedded in all new and upgraded infrastructure projects, so that, you know, if you're digging a hole in the ground for a new road or rail line, that there's room for a pipeline, or a pipeline is put in place at the same time to enable connectivity between projects. Simple example. And we wanted data to be collected, stored and used in a safe, secure and ethical way. One of the challenges we have is the proprietary nature of data. There's generally a reluctance, particularly in the business community, but also within governments, that data should be protected, not shared. I just observed this as a layperson, that one of the main conversations I see is got to be careful with data and how it's shared. Experts tell me that there are ways to use the data lake model to put lots of information into a place and remove any of the concerns about it being individuals or projects being identified, and still being able to access and use the data in a way that, with shared with other data, can support new thinking and better ways of doing business. So that was the idea of the framework, was to set some of those rules in place, or use those as examples. And we decided to focus on these key infrastructure areas: energy, water, transport, telecommunications, social infrastructure, such as libraries, etc., and sustainability and resilience, which is a growing discussion that we have in all of our communities with the impact of climate change. So we looked at those 6 areas, and we discussed in some detail how particular aspects of developing and delivering on those projects could be positively impacted by having a smart infrastructure policy built in to the business case for those projects. We met with the state government, as I've said, and got a great response back from the Deputy Premier, and they're all already working on a couple of significant projects, and we're hoping to offer our support for those. But last year, the state published its state infrastructure strategy, which covered off a whole lot of stuff in built infrastructure and otherwise, but it did specify a digital by default approach, which is really critical and something that we applaud. And there are two projects currently underway, as I've just mentioned here. One is working with the Cross River Rail Delivery Authority, which has been working in the digital twin space almost since the outset, has a very impressive facility in the city of Brisbane where it can demonstrate the benefits of using a digital twin model for the planning of that multi-billion-dollar project. And also the state's currently reviewing their BIM implementation policy and policy papers. And we're hopeful that the work that we've done on the Smart Infrastructure Policy Framework can be a supportive document, whether it's taken up or it's in its entirety, or it's simply an influencer on thinking that can be brought to bear to help benefit those and other projects that we know the state will move forward on in coming months and years. So that's a bit of an outline on where we are with that project. The Digital Twin project was one of the other three that we identified jointly with the Smart Cities Council, and I'm hopeful that we can pick that project up and move forward together in our engagement with the state government. Digital twinning is a critical part of particularly the efficiency of delivering government projects and policy. Now, there's a good reason why all this is important, and I talked about that at the beginning of my discussion. Last year, the committee published a paper called SEQ 2050, a Transport and Mobility Vision. And we engaged McCrindle Research futurists to have a look at 2050 in Southeast Queensland, what it will look like and what we'll be doing as a way of influencing for that particular project, what sort of transport and mobility and connectivity structures will we need in place to be able to continue to have good livability in our region. And some of the outcomes, I think, are relevant for conversations about why a better digital and data future, particularly the literacy component of that for business, is critical to maintaining great lifestyle and livability. So in 2050, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have nearly double the population we do now in Southeast Queensland, 5.9 million people. Really interestingly, nearly 80% of the entire state's population is going to be living in the southeast corner. That's a pretty big number of people and will have a significant impact, I would expect, on government policy making when there are always challenges in a large decentralised state like Queensland with where money is spent on infrastructure. If we got 80% of our population in Southeast Queensland by 2050, that I would expect is going to have a significant influence on spending and policy decisions. The critical role that data and digital capability can play here, to me, is obvious when you just simply look at timetabling of trains and buses, for example. You know, the ability to have coordinated traffic lights in a city, all those sorts of simple things that are available now can help maintain the best livability possible as the population increases significantly. McCrindle found a couple of interesting things with the generations. So in Southeast Queensland now, we've got 6 generations. I'm a boomer, second from the left there. We're down to Generation Alpha that currently is age 12 and under. Interestingly, by 2050, we move to 7 generations all living here at the same time. Bad news for the boomers on the right-hand side there. There's only 211,000 of us left. So we've all started moving off and making way for the rest. But we're right through to Generation Gamma that we haven't got yet. We haven't got Beta or Gamma yet. They're coming. But as you would see on any bell curve, as you would expect with population, the vast majority of numbers sit in the middle there. These are the people who are going to be living in our community in 2050. Then we started to have a look at jobs and transport and where people will be living. And this has definite impact on the ability to have a good data and digital future. These were some of the jobs of the future. that McCrindle talked about. Some of these exist at the moment, but certainly in their infancy. Drone pilot, blockchain developer, virtual reality engineer, robotics mechanic. Southeast Queensland, through the Advanced Robotics Hub for Manufacturing in Brisbane, is, I'm told, the leading place in Australia for robotic software development. So that's a reality here, but small scale. AI specialists, urban farmers. This will be a new thing for us. Countries like Singapore understand the importance of urban farming, and particularly the urban farm concept with scarcity of land. That's something, as our population grows and availability of land shrinks, that we really have to turn our mind to. Space tourism agent. When we launched this last year, everybody in the room had a good murmur about being a space tourism agent. It seemed to be the most popular job. And driverless transport operator. Again, this exists already, particularly in the mining community and elsewhere, but McCrindle have forecast that these sorts of jobs are going to be the ones that are growing over the next 20 to 30 years. Every single one of those requires on robust data and good digital connectivity, and of course, the education that comes through our university and TAFE sector with growing, the competent people who are going to be looking after those jobs. So that future is intrinsically linked to a data and digital future in a smart region. And the transport of the future, which was the main purpose of the paper that we published. Aerial ride sharing. I went out to where the Advanced Robotics Hub for Manufacturing was before Christmas and stood next to a passenger drone that can take 4 people that's being trialled in Brisbane now, that will be able to move people around Southeast Queensland, subject to the right policy settings being in place with respect to safety. So aerial ride sharing. People won't necessarily be catching taxis or trains for short hops. They can go via a drone, passenger drone. High-speed rail, which has been on the agenda and up for discussion between all levels of government about a link from Melbourne through to Brisbane. In this context, we're talking about a link from the Gold Coast to the Sunshine Coast and potentially a one from Brisbane out to Toowoomba, where we have a much faster way of connecting to those major centres, which limits the need for people to travel on the roads. Autonomous vehicles, they're being trialled around the world now. Connected autonomous vehicles, they can work like caterpillars and work in a safe way, perhaps on dedicated lines on the road that allow people to relax while they are taken to their destination. And coming with autonomous vehicles is various forms of mobility as a service. Hyperloop, this is a bit of a dream, I think, Hyperloop. This is very fast rail. There's questions about whether we've got the population available to support a Hyperloop, but that's what McCrindle predicted. Trackless trams, delivery drones, these are being trialled now. Logan, just south of Brisbane, is trialling delivery drones now for food and small goods. E-mobility devices, as we move to, as I said, mobility as a service, where you just say, I want to get from A to B, and the device plans your trip, works out which modes of transport you are using, takes the payment, and hopefully rewards you for any active transport solution for health and wellbeing outcomes. And then on-demand shuttles, again, this is being trialled now. Every single one of these relies on technology, data, good digital connectivity to be as efficient as they possibly can be. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm very happy if there are any questions to take those.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think there is a question in the Q&A actually, which is from Will Dowie, and he's asking, how do you think green infrastructure / urban biodiversity projects can manage within big data smart cities?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't know that we've seen the link well discussed yet, but certainly when we published our paper last year on mobility and transport in Southeast Queensland, we focused on, out of that huge area for discussion, we focused on 3 specific elements. One was freight movement. How do we ensure that the freight movement and passenger movement is as safe as possible and doesn't increase congestion on our roads? The second one was improving the uptake of new technology, and I've just mentioned a couple of those. And the third was the concept of the 15-minute community, which comes down to green infrastructure, urban biodiversity. That is, you live in a community that allows you to work as much as you can from home, minimise your travel on the road, particularly the main regional roads and arterial roads, as little as possible, where you access all your services and facilities, including your open space and recreation, as close as possible to your community. Paris, the Mayor of Paris has just dictated this policy for that city as people were becoming less and less connected to their community. They're moving to the 15-minute community. It's a concept we promoted here. But a critical element of that is the health and mental well-being of communities, and that has to be linked to open space. Urban farming would be green infrastructure, parklands, etc. So I think these are critical, and we don't probably value as best as we should how important that is to our community. And data can help tell the story about what positive well-being, health and well-being impacts we can have from more green infrastructure and better urban biodiversity.
Thank you, Button. Yeah, just a sort of a note from Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
And yeah, if there's any other questions, please either put them in the chat or the Q&A, or you can also raise your hand and I can.
How does the regional strategy complement national or federal agenda? Where we can, we have linked the policy proposals that we've pulled together with existing projects or ideas being floated by various levels of government. There are many. At every opportunity, we talk about not recreating the wheel or replicating work that's already in place, but building on initiatives of government. So at the end of I think it's on the last page of the 2050 vision we published last year, we listed about a dozen local, federal and state policies, strategy papers or projects that we reviewed as part of the project. So we thought it was critical to acknowledge that work's happening. We're not trying to say nothing's happening, but we just wanted to present a livability focus or livability lens on that critical issue. But it's really important that we build on what's already been done and seek to influence stuff where we can. I should just say that the document that I referenced, the first document, is available on the committee's website, which is just committeeforbrisbane.org.au. Anyone can hop on there and download that. The framework is not in the public domain yet, and that's because we wanted to have a private discussion with the state government first and explore that before we put it in the public domain.
Yeah, that sounds good. We're very excited to be working with you in the future as well around the Digital Twin project too. Another question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee. What recommendation will there be in regards to tools requires for horizontal and vertical infrastructure projects?
You're probably asking someone who doesn't have the knowledge to answer that question. As I said at the start, I'm not a subject matter expert. We did talk about it in the framework document about the linkages horizontally and vertically in a policy sort of setting. But look, that's probably beyond my ability to answer that one. Sorry.
From Belinda, and she just asking for a link to the Smart Cities paper by Queensland chief scientist in 2007 for Brisbane to today's approach in SCQ today. Is a narrative you could briefly describe?
That predates my time in this organisation by quite a number of years. I'm not aware of that paper, Belinda, I'm sorry. We do have a good relationship with that office, although it would be a different person there now to who's there today. I'm sure Smart Cities Council and Adam, when he was in that role, certainly the team now would be fully familiar with that, but I'm just not aware of that particular paper, I'm sorry. And sorry, just with sharing the link, I can try and share a link. I'm not an expert at this.
Just copy and paste it into the chat if you press on the chat.
I'll copy and paste it from my website.
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to try and do that. So keep asking questions while I'm doing that, because I'm a novice in these things. So any other questions coming up while I'm doing that one?
So I think Drew actually found that 2007 paper, it seems like, and sent it to everyone. So thanks for that, Drew.
Thank you. So I'm just going to put in the link to our advocacy page. I'm just trying to work out where best to put that in here. Right. Hopefully that takes everyone to our advocacy page, and if you just scroll down on that, about the third document down is our 2050 transport and mobility vision. Did that come up okay enough?
Yeah, it's opening, and then so I can see where it is. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. It should inspire the world. Well, that's nice. Thank you very much. Oh, did I just do the panelists? Sorry, Mark.
I think you've only sent that. That's all right. I can reshare it. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
No worries. Any other questions for Barton?
Chris's question. Resistance is probably too strong a word. I would say it's more the back end of your question, concerns. I see this in the public and the private sectors, Chris. I often hear from public sector people involved in the data community that the private sector won't share data. And as an example, you can have, let's say, a large property organisation that owns a number of buildings in a city, and they collect data on foot traffic and, you know, the movement of people at various times up and down the lifts, and who's eating in the building, who's not. So interesting material, but they won't share it outside themselves. They use it for their own marketing purposes. So that's an example of where I've heard the business sector being criticised for not sharing data. And then the alternative, the other side of the coin is also true, where I see, again, I'm a layperson, but I see there's a proprietorial approach by governments to data where they consider it's important from a security and privacy perspective that they don't share it broadly, not in every case, but that they don't share it broadly. So as I understand it, again, as a layperson, the concept of the data hub or data lake is to provide a place where it's safe for organisations from public and private sectors to park their data, ensure that there's enough anonymity built into the system so that people who wish to can access various pools of data for their particular circumstance and benefit from it. And I hear often from colleagues that I've talked to that this is one of the biggest challenges, is the ability to feel confident in sharing data, understanding that others will see it and may benefit from it. And I think that's one really big step we've got to take as a country and a community to get over that challenge. Well, lots of things coming up here. Are there any others up there around that I can?
So there's a note from Mofasign, if I'm saying that correctly. Could be interesting to have signage that dynamically direct people away from danger, which would require a digital twin.
Well, you know, these are, I'm presuming, danger with respect to either public incidents or infrastructure damage. Yeah, absolutely, of course. You know, I don't use it, but people use an app. Is it Waves or something when you're driving along, where it's community input on where potholes in the road are, or where a police radar might be, or where there's an accident. Friends of mine use it, and that's where we're using community shared data in a single platform to identify areas of danger or concern. I 100% agree with that. It should be one of the community benefits that we get from having better access to data.
Thanks. And a question from Jay Rooney, which is, what potential do you see for digital twin technology in facilitating climate adaptation for cities?
Oh, 100%. One of the main conversations we're having with governments and our members is resilience. That seems to be now the new common term for dealing with climate change. You cannot make decisions without access to data. You know, as simple things as rainfall, flood mapping, sediment outfall, flood levels. I mean, that's at the simplest level. You can't have a more resistant community unless you've got the information to make the right decisions. And that has to be historic and contemporary information. And some of that must also include the experiences and knowledge of First Nations people who have stories of place that go back thousands of generations, and we don't use that for some of that planning. I think it is absolutely one of the most critical outcomes for how I don't think we can facilitate climate change adaptation. We probably wouldn't use those words. We have to respond to climate change and make changes to what we're putting into our environment at the same time as help to improve the resilience of our current community, because we live on the east coast of Australia essentially on a floodplain. That's a fact of life, and we're not going to be picking entire cities up and moving them. So we've got to look at how we become more resilient, and that includes being prepared and having good responses in built form.
Thanks for that. A question from Monowar. It seems the whole process of policy department needs a champion, whether that's an individual or a group. Do you think a similar exercise can be driven without a champion?
My personal view is you need the champion. And again, I'm not picking on any particular jurisdiction, but I'm told through my colleagues at the Smart Cities Council that the Minister in New South Wales, who's driven significant change in that state, is a person who is knowledgeable about the topic, knows what the benefits are, has the imprimatur of the Premier there to drive forward, and is coordinating across departments. This is what I've been told, and has really been demonstrating leadership as a champion within government about what the benefits of having good data and digital policy can be. So, look, I personally believe you need a champion around any cabinet table. You've got 15 to 20 people sitting. They're all responsible for particular portfolios, and they all have a strong voice for that portfolio. If there isn't a strong voice specifically on these opportunities, or multiple voices, I think it's a challenge. It's not impossible, but I do personally think that that's a challenge.
Thank you. And a question from Stevie and DeFilla, if I'm saying that correctly. What is the proportion of public versus private fund for this project?
I'm not quite sure of the question. We don't have a project per se. We just presented a policy paper. So our policy
I'm not sure if Stevie is maybe the Olympics or the...
For the Olympics, it's primarily privately funded. While there will be infrastructure built for the Olympics, the rules under the modern Olympic Charter is that you, as a city, are not allowed to build infrastructure for the Games. You can build infrastructure for your community and use it for the Games, but you can't build something for the Games. So primarily the funding for running the Games is raised privately by the organising committee. The state and federal governments and some local governments will contribute funding to infrastructure, but it's infrastructure that is for the community's benefit, not for the Games. But for our project, there's no funding for our project. It's a policy framework. Yeah.
And I think there's a question in the Q&A from Alan Long, which is, will this dovetail into the CSIRO digital twin smart city project similar to the New South Wales spatial digital twin?
Our hope is yes. We have a member of Data 61 from CSIRO on our working group that developed the policy, who's a member of the Committee for Brisbane. So yes, we hope so. Ours will be obviously, I think what's happening in Queensland could be a smaller project. There's a potential to do a digital twin for the Games in 2032 as a starting point. But if my understanding is correct, the ambition is to have a digital twin for the state ultimately. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of work to be done there. But yes, my expectation is that there will be those linkages with CSIRO.
No worries. Any other questions from the participants?
Looks like we're all good.
Yeah, that was quite a few questions. So thank you for that, Button. Thanks for the presentation as well. And
Thank you for the opportunity.
no worries.
Much
And thanks
appreciated.
to everyone else who joined as well. We'll send this recording to everyone who attended as well, and it will also be on our YouTube channel too.
Thanks all.
Guys. See ya.
Okay.